By a vote of 202 to 117, the Liberal NDP coalition voted against a motion by the Conservatives to end the travel mandates imposed by the Trudeau government. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley joining us once again from Toronto. Brian, are we not the only G20 country left that still has this in place? What's the reasoning why so many MPs voted against this?
It's puzzling to me. They've not only voted against it, the government has extended these measures until at least June 30th. And this isn't for incoming travelers. This is for domestic travelers. This is saying, so one, it's the randomized testing. It is the proof of vaccination to get on any flight. Look, there are still several countries that have proof of vaccination requirements for entering. I believe the United States is one of them, though Italy's just dropped it, and other countries have dropped these measures as well. But we're doing it for domestic travel. Planes and trains. I'm surprised they didn't figure out a way to add in automobiles, but planes and trains, you still need to show that you're fully vaccinated. And, what's the reasoning behind it? Justin Trudeau used it as a good election tool to win and scare people for votes last fall, and he's going to continue it. Nathaniel Erskine Smith is one of the Liberal MPs who didn't vote in favor of it. He abstained, and he said he abstained because he didn't agree with the government's position, but he thought the Conservative motion of ending it all right now was too fast. But he said, look, we've got to have a discussion about this. And at least there was that from at least one Liberal saying, look, maybe we leave masking in place on airplanes for now, but we drop this, or we drop masking, but not that. He wants to actually move forward. Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and his NDP coalition partners are stuck in the past. They don't want to give up COVID restrictions. I'd love to hear Dr. Tam asked as to whether this is required. All we have here in Ontario is there's a mandate for wearing a mask on public transportation. Public transit, that's about to end. That will end, I think, in about 12 days. And there is no desire by Dr. Moore to extend it. In fact, I'm quite sure that he would have dropped it earlier, but by the time he was in that mindset, we were in the middle of an election. So he's just staying quiet here in Ontario. But yeah, the Trudeau Liberals and their NDP coalition partners are stuck in the past.
Now, CPC leadership frontrunner Pierre Poilievre was called out shortly after the vote against the travel mandates, since it appears as though he abstained from voting. But Brian, apparently there was a bit of a technical glitch with the government software when he tried to vote from Thunder Bay.
Yeah, Pierre Poilievre is touring the country still, and he was in Thunder Bay in northern Ontario. Now, it's not like they don't have good internet there, but it can be a tricky system, voting remotely. So people jumped on that, but it's led by people like Theo Fleury, who I've interviewed Theo, have a lot of respect for him. He was on Twitter right away. There were critics of Pierre Poilievre on Twitter right away saying, see, he's a globalist shill. He believes in keeping these. But these are people who believe that Pierre Poilievre is a member of the World Economic Forum. He's multi-millionaire because of bribes he's been taking. These are some of the claims that have been made against Pierre Poilievre, and those were the people sharing this. Pierre put out a statement later saying he's against extending the mandates. He wants them to end. He's spoken clearly about this. It's a shame that this has become so political. The government says they want to follow the science. I don't think they're following the science. And that's why Pierre actually called them anti-science mandates.
Brian, it's not a handgun ban, but the Liberals are promising to put a national freeze on buying, selling, and importing handguns. What's the difference here?
Well, these things are really dangerous, Hal. The government wants you to know that handguns are really dangerous, and they are in the wrong hands, don't get me wrong. But they're so dangerous that they've got to stop people who are licensed and fully vetted by the RCMP from being able to buy or sell them. But they can keep them. I don't know how that makes any sense at all. So in some ways, it's a ban on new handguns, but they're allowing the more than 1 million handguns that are out there to remain in possession of their owners. Now, I guess it's a wait them out sort of strategy. They will say that you can't sell them. So somebody passes on, you can't will them to someone, your estate can't sell them. unless it's to a licensed business or exempt individual. So you're just going to have to turn them into the government at some point. That seems to be their strategy. I mean, if I was a handgun owner who was getting on in years, I might look at, selling them or transferring them to my children now, so that they could keep them later on. And you're going to see a lot of moves like that. So it's a ban on new imports, a ban on new sales, and a ban on new transfers once the legislation takes effect. It hasn't come into effect yet. They did say they'll wait for the legislation, but if it takes too long, they also suggested they might use regulation to put this ban in place, just like they did with the AR-15s and other rifles that they, falsely call military-style assault weapons.
Have they talked about the potential of when they want to implement this new legislation?
They're saying as soon as possible. Now, look, the Liberals have been talking about this for years. In the 2019 election, they campaigned on allowing municipalities to ban handguns. That was a ridiculous idea that would never work. In the last election, they campaigned on allowing provinces to ban handguns. Again, a ridiculous concept that would never work. They floated the idea of a national handgun ban. If these things are as dangerous as they say, I don't know why they're not doing it, other than they know it would be very expensive to buy all those handguns, more than 1.1 million. So it's a case of saying we need to do this really, really quickly, based on the American news cycle, based on the fact that there was another mass shooting in the States. That's what's driving this, Hal, not safety. We're probably looking at the fall. I know they're going to try and push to get it passed before the summer break, but we're about 2 weeks away from that. No way that all of the opposition parties will agree to that.
Have any MPs called out the Trudeau Liberals saying you're really using, like you said, the American tragedies, what happened in Uvalde, Texas, 21 people dying, Buffalo, New York, 10 people dying, to really push an agenda? Is anyone really calling them out on this?
Yeah, I mean, some of the Conservative MPs are, a few people in the media, myself, Lauren Gunter, people like that. But most of the reporting on this has been a repetition of government talking points, that this is about crime, that this is about dealing with crime. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked, about the issue of, are you targeting legal gun owners? He called that misinformation. Well, Hal, I've been through the bill. I went through a technical briefing with top officials in public safety, with the RCMP. I asked them specifically, what elements of crime are you dealing with here? And the only real one is they're going to increase the maximum sentence, not a mandatory, but the maximum sentence you can get for gun smuggling is going to increase from 10 years to 14 years. At the same time, they're doing away with other, sentences. They're lessening them. So, the Prime Minister is spreading misinformation with this. He is targeting legal gun owners and telling you that it's about gun crime. This is a completely false narrative. He should be looking at bail reform. He should be looking at ways of stopping guns coming across the border. Today, I just got a news release from the Toronto Police Service. A 15-year-old arrested with a loaded handgun in Toronto's, I believe this is Toronto's East End. It's believed this is related to carjackings, which have gone up dramatically in the city, armed carjackings. When you look at the list of charges, numerous charges that should carry serious time, even for a minor, with the use of a gun, at the bottom it said, failing to comply with conditions. That means this is a kid who's out on bail. We need bail reform. We need sentencing reform. We don't need more rules for legally licensed gun owners and have the government say that it's about stopping crime when it's not.
Wasn't Mitch Marner, the Leafs, also a victim of a recent carjacking too?
He was.
Wow.
We've had more carjackings so far this year than we had all of last year. There's a shortage of new cars, a high demand for luxury cars due to supply chain problems. So organized crime's figured out a way to do it. And that includes using young people with guns to carry out these carjackings. Is the government dealing with that? No. Instead, what we saw was Prime Minister Trudeau. He actually named a young man, Alfred Wong. It was a 15-year-old kid shot and killed recently in crossfire in Vancouver, crossfire between gangs. He used his name and what happened to him in introducing this bill. He used the idea that domestic violence went through the roof during COVID. increased by 1.5%, according to Stats Canada. He claimed that there is a femicide going on. He uses all of these things that aren't true or highly exaggerated to push his legislation that won't touch any of these crimes.
Brian, we talked about going after the legal gun owners, but the Trudeau Liberals also announced lower sentences for serious gun crimes, such as not receiving consecutive life sentences. I know in the United States, let's say if you kill 6 people, first-degree murder, 25 years, 30 years for each person, you're never going to get out of jail. That's not the case here in Canada. How does this make any sense?
Okay, so the consecutive life sentences is a recent Supreme Court decision, and it's a horrible one. The government is talking about will they appeal, they'll consider. They haven't said for sure yet. The lowering of sentences for gun crimes, that's in a different bill called Bill C-5. They introduced this before they introduced the so-called tough on crime legislation that they brought out yesterday. Bill C-5 is getting rid of mandatory minimum sentences. Now, there is a false narrative pushed by the government that courts in this country have deemed all mandatory minimums to be unconstitutional. That is not the case. A couple of them have been deemed unconstitutional, some for drugs, some for different gun crimes, but not the ones that they're getting rid of now. These are ones that they're removing on their own. Mandatory minimums have been part of Canada's criminal code for decades. Pierre Trudeau himself brought in mandatory minimums on some gun crimes, and now his son is getting rid of them, including, knowingly possessing an illegal firearm. Right now, there's no mandatory minimum sentence on your first offense. On your second offense, you'll get a 1-year sentence, and on your third offense, you'll get a 2-year mandatory minimum sentence. That's hardly harsh or cruel and unusual punishment. And it's not, as the Liberals say, they have actually claimed they're doing this because they don't want someone who's just made a mistake to end up with a life in prison. Well, by the time you've got your third conviction for possessing an illegal gun, you're not just some kid making a mistake. You're a hardened criminal who's willing to use a gun in violent crime.
Brian, there was another report into sexual misconduct in the Canadian military, more demands for change, but really not much action taken by the Trudeau Liberals.
They've had reports going back to 2015. The Deschamps report was written for the previous Harper government. They got that report and promised change and action shortly before the 2015 election. So there wasn't really time for them to act on it. But the military brass said that they would, and they didn't. And we've had more reports since. And now we've got a report by former Supreme Court Justice Louis Arbour. And many of the recommendations sound familiar, including stop letting the military investigate itself on claims of sexual assault or sexual harassment. And the government's not committing to make these changes. There's a lot of good words, but not a lot in the way of action. And this is a crisis for our military because who wants to, sign up? How well is recruiting going when the main story in the media is that the guys at the top keep getting charged, accused of sexual misconduct, and it's not, some of the stories you hear about Hollywood celebrities, you kind of look sideways and say, is that really sexual harassment? Some yes, some no. In the case of the military, I haven't heard one that wasn't credible. These aren't celebrities trying to damage each other's reputation like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. This is credible, and it happens again and again, and the government is not acting. They need to get serious. I thought with putting Anita Anand as the defense minister, that might change things. Was not impressed with her reaction yesterday, so we'll have to wait and see if she has more ability to force the change that Harjit Sajjan just couldn't because he was a captive of the generals his entire time as defense minister.
Brian, a major business deal appears to be falling apart after criticism from federal agencies. Toronto-based Rogers is apparently walking away from its proposed takeover of Calgary-based Shaw. What happened there?
The Competition Bureau was making too many noises for the company to be companies to feel comfortable going forward. And so on Monday, Rogers said that they were going to walk away close to a $30 billion deal that would have merged both cable operations, internet operations, cell phone operations of the two companies. Now, these are two geographic giants. I know that Rogers has business across the country, as does Shaw, but really, it's a Western and Eastern giants coming together in a merger that would have made a very impressive foe for companies like Bell Media and Bell Telephone. They were opposed to the deal. There were problems with selling off Freedom Mobile, which Shaw owns, and the Competition Bureau said, well, you can't have all of these. There were problems with getting rid of that. There were questions about whether this would be anti-competitive in allowing the deal to go forward. So yeah, Rogers walking away, quite surprised, because people I've spoken to at Rogers were determined to make this happen no matter what. We'll see what the next move is for Rogers, and Ed Rogers, who was in the news much himself recently. Maybe he'll finally buy the Blue Jays himself and take them private.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist and Blue Jays fan, Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.